A disaster is coming. By combining millennia of evidence, centuries of study, and the modern capabilities of technology, we can answer the challenge to explain all the evidence of Earth's disaster cycle, and we have all the tools to track the next one. The Earth is about to do something it hasn't done for thousands of years. The magnetic poles are shifting, the strength of Earth's magnetic field is fading, there are magnetic changes throughout the solar system and on the sun. We're going to be showing you stories of this cycle of disaster that will visit us again soon. We'll begin with the pole shift. It's real, and it's going to happen. In fact, it's already happening.
Hey guys, welcome back to UNASA TV. So this time last week, we had a spectacular aurora show right here in North Carolina. My wife and I had some chairs sitting out in the lawn, and we had a beautiful clear night. You could see the pink hues kind of waving out across the sky. And then every now and then you saw these kind of white dancing stripes that would just pop up and wave for a little bit and then disappear. It was absolutely spectacular. But with that show that you would think was once in a lifetime, but is becoming more and more common in the lower latitudes of our planet, there was also a very ominous feeling because we know what exactly that means and what was going on. Those X flares that hit our planet were nothing spectacular. They were, 1, 2, 5. They weren't anything big enough to normally have driven those auroras this far south. And some people were talking about cannibalistic flares where one was moving faster, the other one cannibalized it and made a bigger show. But even then, the flares that hit Earth were not anything enormous. What you were actually seeing was how weak our magnetosphere has become. And I'm going to talk about this because obviously there's been a lot of conversations going on since that event. There were 3 similar events last year. This is the second one this year. I mean, we're seeing this happen on a regular basis. And yet, if you look throughout history, this is actually a very rare occurrence. But before I get into that, just a couple days ago, I took some homeschool boys out on a 20-mile hike, and it was about 80 degrees. And I'm going to use this hike analogy a couple times in this video, actually, but it was about 80 degrees. We had some rain moving in, but we had to complete 20 miles with very little breaks. It was part of a challenge, and I led the hike. And I wore sneakers for this hike instead of my hiking boots because I wanted to keep my feet kind of light, easily moving. And with that, I wore some buffalo wool Boss socks. You can get these on UNASA Trading Company. These are basically, like your typical short socks you wear when you're running, but the bison wool mixed with the merino wool is absolutely amazing. 20 miles, haven't washed these yet. They still smell like they're new out of the package. It is absolutely amazing. My feet didn't get wet the entire time. They didn't even get sweaty, no blisters. Very comfortable socks. If you guys care about your feet, which you should, and I'll get into that in a second, you should definitely consider getting some of these socks. They are awesome, and they're American made. The fibers support farmers. A lot of people don't recognize the important value add that wool brings to sheep farmers, bison ranchers, and so if you can swing it to get products like these, they'll last you for a very long time. I still have some bison wool socks I wear from back in 2017 when they were first introduced to me, and they're still amazing socks. Check out our website. We've got all sorts of buffalo wool socks on there. But anyway, this isn't about good socks. This is about, everybody's concerns about what is happening with our magnetosphere, with the sun, with the planet, and what could possibly happen. Well, in reality, guys, if you follow Polar Shift, Polar Wander, there used to be a lot of data available out there to you. Some of that data came straight off of NASA. If you go there today, you won't find much data past 2014, 2018, that era. And there's a reason for that. If people understood the complexities of what's going on right now, there would probably be a lot of fear. And I think that there's a lot of fear with a lot of viewers or a lot of people who have asked me questions about what's going on, because they're paying attention and they're saying, this looks like a polar shift. And indeed, a lot of scientists believe that we are heading into a polar shift.
There are major magnetic pole shifts every 12,000 years called geomagnetic excursions. There are even more minor events on the 6,000-year half cycles. The China event was just confirmed earlier this year. The most well-studied events are the last one 12,000 years ago, the Gothenburg geomagnetic excursion, and an exceptionally powerful one about 40-something thousand years ago, called Le Champ. It's the same for other events. You can find information on all of them when you search the science journals. This happens very regularly, and it has already started happening again now. The Earth began its magnetic shift in the 1850s, but it has progressed more since the year 2000 than it had in the 150 years or so before. The shift is accelerating and will keep accelerating. These events coincide with major climate shifts in the past, volcanic events, and biosphere stress that results in the extinctions of species. These magnetic excursions take out several species and cause serious stress on the entire food chain, through not only volcanoes and climate shifts, but extra space radiation, navigational issues with birds, mammals, and marine creatures. These shifts can happen very rapidly. In fact, if the next one happened tomorrow, it already wouldn't be the fastest one in history after having been ongoing now for more than 150 years.
And I've heard some talk that that polar shift could happen in the 2030s, 2040s. Some people don't know when it's going to happen. What generally happens is those poles, as they start to move closer and closer, they're going to speed up, because it's like running two magnets closer together. The closer you put them together, the stronger that magnetic pull is. And then all of a sudden it happens very quickly. So the actual shift does happen over a long period of time, but the ending of that shift is very quick. And when that happens, there's a lot of catastrophes on Earth. There's big, massive tidal waves that take out entire coastlines, come far inland in some areas. There'll be volcanic eruptions everywhere. I mean, tornadoes, hurricanes, massive storms, because when that happens, our entire magnetosphere is changing the direction of its magnetic fields. And so it just disrupts everything on planet Earth. But this has happened many times before, and humans have lived through it before. There's evidence that humans have lived through these polar shifts in the past. So it's not, the end of the world, but it is a very, very challenging time. And when people talk about, well, where's the safe place going to be? I need to get to the safe place. They're missing a very big point to all of this. I don't think that there is a safe place when that happens. I think the only safe place is where you are led to be. And I think that those who are led to be in particular places, they'll be fine, because that's where they were told they should be. That is actually the only scenario, because even if you tried to get up into the 5,000 feet range above sea level, you're just entering the areas where you're going to have a lot of plate shifting, a lot of volcanic activity, and it's just as deadly as being close to the ocean, in my perspective. The thing is don't waste your resources, your time, and your energy preparing for this apocalyptic event. It's not going to save you. It's not going to get you anywhere. There is absolutely nothing that is going to get you through that other than mental conditioning. When we took our boys on a 20-mile hike, the first thing we did was we took off and we hiked the first 10 miles without taking a break. We didn't stop for much. We drank water as we walked. If they needed a snack, they ate it as they walked. There was no break for that first 10-mile stretch. We were going to knock out half of that 20 miles with no break. And we did it fine. We averaged about 17 minutes per mile. It was a pretty good pace. And then we took a break. That was our longest break of the entire trip. After that, when you're hiking, you try and get by another 4 miles before you get a break, and 2 miles before you get a break. And the last several miles are the hardest, and only those who can actually handle the ultimate task are the ones who can get through all 20 miles. Luckily, everybody with us got through all 20 miles. Some of that is good leadership. Some of that is just the pure mental capacity of the boys. And they had been through several hiking trips before the 20 mile to help build up to that level of a hike. So they had been conditioned. I kind of think about prepping as the same way. And when I think about this scenario, I think of it as a very similar way, because you cannot prepare for the unknown, and you cannot waste your resources trying to get into what you think is going to be the perfect situation for a situation that is different and impacts Earth differently every time it happens. I mean, and by that I mean the areas where the poles end up are going to be very different. The areas, I mean, we can kind of determine where they will be, but the entire process and what happens is going to be different each and every time, because Earth has changed since the last one, right? The plates have shifted. You don't know. For all we know, there are large chunks of land that could fall off into the ocean. I mean, the entire oceans could change during these types of events. When you think about, what is actually happening out there, there are immediate concerns that if you're prepared for and you make it through those, then you're going to be better. You're going to be set up perfectly for that future. And the reality is by the time we get to that point, if it happens, if by the time we get to that point, there's going to be a lot less to contend with as far as finding the perfect location. I can tell you that. What we're seeing in our solar system, the first concern that I have had, and I mentioned on this channel several times, is the sun going into a minimum phase. Because when it does that, and for an extended period of time, we call them grand solar minimums. When it does that, it dramatically impacts climate and weather on Earth and our growing conditions. And it actually creates more adverse growing conditions than when you're in the solar maximum phases. And they have the 11-year cycle, which a lot of you know about. You go into the minimum, you go into the maximum, go into the minimum. But then they have what we call a grand solar maximum and a grand solar minimum phase. The grand solar maximum phase we just came out of about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, a couple cycles ago. And during that phase, we had a very strong solar cycle, and by that the sun just had a lot of spots. It was a very even-keeled amount of energy. Our magnetosphere was very strong, and that was a great time for us to grow. We had an abundance of food. It was easy to grow food. We were getting better and better crops every single year, year after year. The energy on Earth was very stable. We were able to have this technological boom during the grand solar maximum. All of this happened during this period of time because all of the technology we have relies on that magnetic frequency, that magnetosphere. We have radio communications, we have Wi-Fi, cell phones, we have all sorts of signals that depend on it, but then our energy in and of itself depends on the direction of the flow of the magnetic energy on our planet. So to see that disrupted would disrupt all of that. And to see, the sun go into a more dim phase, that's going to affect patterns on Earth. For example, the ENSOs. So in our lifetimes, El Nino has been more prominent. El Nino is great for growing crops in. It creates good growing conditions, whereas La Nina tends to cause more droughts. But La Nina has been a lot less frequent during this grand solar maximum period that we have gone through. And I've done videos in the past talking about how solar activity directly impacts El Nino and La Nina. Well, if we went into a more of a grand solar minimum cycle, if the sun basically kind of went to sleep for a little bit there, we would experience more La Niñas. If you look over the past couple of years, we've had 3 La Niñas followed by 1 El Nino. We're going right back into another La Nina. So basically 4 out of 5 years, we've experienced La Nina events. And these events cause havoc for the agricultural industry. La Nina is not great growing conditions. It creates droughts. It has other problems. The other thing that you'll notice during these periods of time is you'll notice that instead of there being lots of steady sunspots across the sun, you'll start having these massive sunspots that put off these massive solar flares. The X8 flare that went off just as that large sunspot kind of moved away from Earth the other day would have been big enough to cause some disruptions here on Earth, more so than the repetitive 5 X flares that we had just a few days before. So there are things to be concerned about with our electrical grids, with our technology, and then of course agriculture right now, things that you should be paying attention to. And my theory, if you look at the solar progression of this cycle, it kind of took off very strong. A lot of people thought, oh, this is going to be another strong cycle. Everybody's wrong. Then it kind of flickered out, tapered, and the way it looks right now to me, we're going to start seeing that solar activity drop off. And to me, that's a very ominous sign, because if you go back to the beginning of the Maunder Minimum, or the mini ice age, and you go back even further, the previous projections, when they're able to go back and remodel solar activity, it does a very similar thing just before it enters those phases, which means in the next solar cycle, which could still be years from now, we could see us enter into a long minimum phase again. That we may not see that many sunspots. We may be in this longer period, this longer trend of time. The other issue that's going on that's compiled with that is the weakening of our magnetosphere as those poles continue to come together in a pole shift. We are thousands of years beyond the timeline of when we should expect to have another pole shift. And so it appears from the words and the studies of a lot of scientists that that's kind of where we're headed now. And that's why our magnetosphere is weakening so much. Well, you have a couple issues there. When the sun goes into a minimum state, not only does it put off these massive coronal mass ejections, but we also have an influx of cosmic ray activity. Cosmic rays seed more clouds. That could cause a difference in what we experience in weather patterns here on Earth, dramatic difference. You know, everybody's worried about cloud seeding. Well, what happens when it happens naturally, right? And that's exactly what I expect us to see over the next 10 years or so. Before we ever get to this apocalyptic scenario where oceans are shifting and volcanoes are going off and everything that everybody's talking about is worrying them, we're going to experience a series of things. We're going to experience a global food shortage. We're already experiencing a global food shortage. You guys should already be preparing for a global food shortage, but I think it's going to get a lot worse. I think the factors that have created it are only getting worse. We're going to experience global unrest because the people that know about this stuff, the people that understand the science of it, are all competing for that end game. We're also most likely, before anything happens catastrophe-wise, we most likely, before anything else, would experience a complete disruption of our technology on Earth, which would be power grids, communication, the whole thing down. When that happens, it will be a very short period of time before we see a massive reduction in population. And that is because our population is unsustainable without technology. There is no way we can sustain the amount of people on this earth without technology. Look at what happened just with the recent solar flares that hit, that disrupted GPS GPSs on tractors. The reason why those GPSs are so important is because without that technology, we can't possibly plant the crops with the yields that we're getting. We couldn't feed the amount of people out there. The technology piece is much bigger than a lot of people think about. They think, well, if we got knocked back to the dark ages, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I'd kind of like it, you know, living under candlelight, things like that. Most people would not survive it. And a lot of people wouldn't survive it within a very short period of time. There'd be a lot of conflict, there'd be a lot of chaos. And then there are those who rely on technology to live, who rely on medications to live. We are a completely unsustainable population when it comes to the laws of nature. And not only that, but because of that, there are even less people that know how to survive without it. So whether or not they have to have it, those that can get by without it are going to have that hard learning curve of how to grow their own food, how to forage, etc. Foragers who waste most of their energy going out and foraging for food won't survive. Our species is an agrarian society. We depend on each other in a way to be able to grow and manage food without wasting too much of our energy to stay alive. That's what helps us thrive. We're not the only ones. If you look at ants, if you look at bees, they all colonize in the same way that humans do. So when people ask me, am I worried about this stuff? My answer is yes and no. I mean, I think it's coming. It could be coming in my lifetime, could be coming in my kids' or my grandkids' lifetime, but I definitely think it's coming. I do think that in my lifetime, what we're going to experience are some major occurrences that are going to be extremely disruptive, and I think that those occurrences in and of themselves are going to disrupt society. And for that reason, you know, I'm not preparing for the unknown. I'm not preparing for the unfathomable. I'm not preparing for those types of things. What I'm most concerned with is making sure that I am building an environment where I can feed my family, take care of my family, have the tools that I need to have on hand to do all that in the event that one of these initial things happens. Because within a year or two after something like that happening, you know, we would probably be led to do other things ourselves. But even then, you've got an entire world out there with a much smaller population and much less things to contend with. Your mobility is going to change dramatically, especially, I mean, think about it. If technology goes down, half the cars we drive are computer-based. None of them would work. Over half the cars, 95% of the cars on the market are that way. And even then, you couldn't get fuel out of the ground. You couldn't get fuel out of the pumps at the stations. Nobody's creating fuel. Within a very short time, you would either be on foot or on horseback. And that's just the reality of that type of scenario. It's unfathomable to most people. They can't even think about a grid down scenario. Nonetheless, can they possibly imagine a pole flip scenario? And then there are those who think that they're just going to go out and, you know, take what everybody else has to survive, survival of the fittest. But what they don't realize is that the more conflicts and interactions they have in that capacity, the greater a chance of their life ending. So many of those people will be wiped up fairly quickly as well, in my opinion. They're walking into a well-fortified homestead to try and steal what they have. What do you think it's going to happen to them? So it's an interesting thing to think about. But I do think that if you look at the world today, if you look at the weather patterns that are developing today, if you look at the global conflict that is developing today, if you look at the unrest, you know, not just in America, but all around the world with citizens and people, the poverty that's growing, the system is already beginning to break down. And for all of those reasons, if not the others, you should be preparing. You should be setting yourself up to survive a period of time without electricity. Maybe it comes from a hack. Maybe it's not one of these natural factors that we throw out there. To live without food, you've got to have access to food somewhere. A good thing that you could do is you could try fasting for certain periods of time, because the part of it is the mental training, right? You have to be mentally prepared to get through those final miles. But right now, just focus on that first 10 miles. That first 10 miles where the grid goes down, society begins to fall apart. How do you survive? The rest of it's all going to fall into place when the time comes to get there. And as long as you have a mental conditioning, you'll persevere through it. I'm sure you will. You know, this also reminds me of the 2024 solar eclipse, which a lot of people noted that the forms that it, the letters that it shaped on the US were the Alpha Tav symbols. There's been a lot of things that I think are interesting coming from the skies. And it's really difficult at this point in time. You know, we have all these different agendas for 2030, 2040. We hear the climate crisis agenda pinpointing certain times of global catastrophe. And they all seem to line up in the same time as what I believe is has scientific accuracy to occur. It's interesting. You know, you hear all this stuff. It's almost like you're being misled in a lot of ways. But I think a lot of people feel like there's something coming, you know? And when you're sitting in your house in Florida or North Carolina and you see northern lights, it's kind of hard to hide the fact that something up there is changing. These are extraordinarily rare occurrences that are happening on a regular basis. So I want to read something to you. This is Luke 21:25. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. It sounds very much like what we're seeing and experiencing today. And I think, you know, the Bible also says that there's nothing new under the sun, which I think is another way of saying history repeats itself. We know that these things have happened in the past. We've been kind of living in a golden era, even for Earth, you know, as far as the Earth being in a state of constant warming, you know, constant kind of a greenhouse effect where we could grow more, we could stabilize and develop technology. But that is actually, in the history of Earth, the rarity, which is what is so amazing about all of this. What we've been experiencing, what has helped us develop and grow into the society we are today, is actually a rare period of time on Earth. And we're about to experience what it's like to get back to nature. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are below. I know some of you probably disagree with me. Some of you are on your way to the Rockies right now, hoping that nothing explodes volcanically. But, you know, you don't have to plan for the worst. You don't have to think that way at all. You don't even, I mean, if it's unfathomable to you, don't worry about that. Just worry about what's happening right now. The things that you can see going on right now.